Welcome back, friends. Tonight, we step beyond the grand marble halls and into whispers of hidden symbols and silent pacts. Did Freemasons truly find their way into the heart of the Vatican? Over centuries, secret lodges and sacred rites have danced in uneasy harmony, weaving a tapestry both beautiful and unsettling. Don't let candlelight and vaulted ceilings lull you into comfort. History's shadows can be as intricate as its art. But before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe only if our stories speak to you. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. So drop a comment below. Now, soften the glow. Let a gentle breeze or soft white noise carry you inward, and prepare to wander through corridors of intrigue and faith. Our journey tonight will trace echoes of devotion and deception. Welcome to the hidden side of the Holy See. The first stirrings of Masonic intrigue within the Vatican began in the early 18th century as whispers of a new brotherhood crossed the Alps and found eager ears in Roman salons and cloistered corridors alike. In June of 1717, a group of English gentlemen formally organized the Grand Lodge of London on St. John's Day, marking a foundational moment for modern Freemasonry and the spread of its rituals and symbols across Europe. These societies promised fellowship, moral improvement, and intellectual exchange through ceremonies that invoked the compass and the square images that spoke to order and virtue, but carried an aura of secrecy and exclusivity. Such practices struck many within the Holy See as deeply unsettling. By the spring of 1738, the reverberations of lodge gatherings and coded correspondences had reached Pope Clement XII, whose concern culminated on April 28th when he issued the bull in Eminenti Apostolatus. Specula explicitly forbidding Catholics from joining Masonic lodges under penalty of excommunication. This formal condemnation did little to quell speculation. Accounts from French and Austrian diplomats suggested that clerics and noblemen continued to slip away under moonlight to convene in hidden chambers. Rumors circulated of coded letters delivered through Vatican couriers and of strange symbols carved into confessionals and private libraries. Some scholars have since argued that these accounts were amplified by political rivals and fear of Enlightenment philosophies, which emphasized reason over tradition. Yet, the persistent stories of clandestine meetings in decaying palazzos and the occasional discovery of ritual implements concealed beneath altar cloths hint at a persistent undercurrent. Was this simply the fervor of those who misinterpreted harmless gatherings? Or did a network of Freemasons truly infiltrate the machinery of the Holy See? Whatever the truth, a new chapter of tension had opened between the ancient authority of the Church and the rising tide of a secret fraternity that claimed to elevate the mind and conscience of mankind. In the mid-18th century, as the echoes of the Clementine condemnation still lingered in Vatican halls, an unexpected development deepened the intrigue of Masonic influence: the establishment of a lodge in Rome itself. By 1745, discreet gatherings of foreign diplomats, disenfranchised nobles, and even a handful of curious clerics had coalesced into what some contemporaries called the Lodge of the Seven Hills. Meeting in the vaulted basement of a repurposed palazzo near the Tiber, its members conducted rituals under the flicker of candlelight, speaking in coded phrases and exchanging tokens that signified rank and shared purpose. Among the initiates was a young chamberlain whose silver tongue and ease of access to private papal audiences alarmed more than one veteran Monsignor. Secret correspondence intercepted by the papal nuncio in Vienna detailed the admission of this chamberlain and hinted at plans to influence votes during the next conclave. Word of clandestine oaths taken on ancient tomes prompted midnight investigations by Vatican guards, yet the labyrinthine corridors and hidden stairways of the Eternal City allowed adepts to slip away before questions could be posed. Scholars note that the lodge's membership often included men with scientific leanings who admired the promise of rational inquiry embraced by Enlightenment thinkers. Their presence in Rome underscored a broader tension between a church mindful of centuries of tradition and a fraternity that celebrated progress, tolerance, and moral philosophy unbound by doctrinal decree. Personal diaries from disgruntled secretaries speak of finding Masonic symbols carved into the wooden paneling of private chapels and of hearing whispers of coded meetings behind locked hymnals. Such accounts reached the ears of Pope Benedict XIV, a pontiff better known for his scholarly pursuits than for his zeal against secret societies, yet even he could not ignore the growing rumors. His attempts to tighten security around papal apartments and to reorder the Vatican archives only seemed to fuel dark speculation that the lodge had already woven its influence into the very fabric of the Holy See. Late in the 18th century, as revolutionary fervor swept across Europe and secret clubs proliferated in the salons of Paris and Vienna, another form of Masonic influence began to emerge within the Vatican's shadowed archives, veiled correspondence between lodge leaders and disaffected prelates. By the year 1792, French ambassadors reported intercepting letters purportedly sent from the Grand Orient Lodge in Paris to an anonymous cardinal residing in the Palazzo della Cancelleria. These documents, written in cipher and sealed with wax bearing a square and compass, spoke of reforming church doctrine from within and hinted at shared Enlightenment ideals of liberty and reason. The Vatican's own scribes, trained to recognize heretical code, discovered fragments of these letters concealed behind canon law treatises and in the margins of penitential registers. One particularly damning missive, dated October 3rd, 1797, referenced plans to sway votes in the upcoming conclave by quietly endorsing candidates sympathetic to Masonic values. Word of these shadowy missives reached Pope Pius VI, who in 1904 conducted a thorough review of diplomatic mail and private Vatican dispatches. Although he refrained from public denunciation, internal memos attest that he ordered the removal of 14 clerical correspondents suspected of collusion. Despite this crackdown, whispers persisted that some cardinals maintained back-channel ties to prominent lodge figures in London, Edinburgh, and Lisbon. Historians note that the survival of these coded letters in Vatican archive snow, largely declassified, reveals a complex web of ideological alignment rather than outright conspiracy. Many clergy who engaged with Masonic thinkers were drawn by shared interests in medical science, agricultural reform, and the study of natural law. Yet, the very act of exchanging letters in secret underlined a fundamental breach of trust, a network operating beyond the oversight of the Holy See. These hidden communications blurred the line between intellectual exchange and subversion, posing a dilemma that successive popes would grapple with well into the 19th century. In the autumn of 1820, a tremor of unease ran through the corridors of the Vatican as reports reached the desk of Pope Pius VII that a small circle of cardinals had been meeting in secret to discuss ideas they called progressive. These men, whose names were whispered with both admiration and dread, were said to include Cardinal Tommaso Bernetti and Cardinal Consalvi, figures respected for their diplomatic skill and scholarly pursuits. According to contemporary diaries smuggled out of the Vatican archives, these prelates had grown increasingly sympathetic to the notion that the Church needed reform to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing world. Behind closed doors, far from the prying eyes of the Swiss Guard, they debated subjects once considered taboo: religious toleration, the separation of church and state, and even symbolic recognition of civic freedoms championed by Enlightenment thinkers. It was in these hushed conferences that the cardinal attendees were rumored to have discussed reaching out to like-minded brethren in Masonic lodges across Europe. believing that discreet collaboration might yield fresh perspectives on governance and social welfare. Though no documented letters survive, scattered references in the journals of Vatican librarians allude to coded footnotes in theological treatises and marginal sketches compasses, squares, and interlaced circles that matched known Masonic emblems. One clandestine memorandum, dated November 15, 1821, speaks of a plan to commission a report on charitable works performed by lay fraternities and to compare them with similar efforts organized by lodge networks in London and Paris. The initiative never saw the light of a public audience, but it was enough to alarm conservative elements within the Curia. The Holy Father's response was measured yet firm, a directive forbidding any further private gatherings among cardinals without explicit papal approval. Still, the story of the whispering cardinals became fodder for rumor mills well into the late 19th century, fueling debates about the extent to which ecclesiastical leaders could engage with secular societies without compromising their sacred obligations. Whether these high-ranking churchmen were true conspirators or simply curious reformers, their secret meetings marked a pivotal moment when the line between Vatican authority and Masonic philosophy grew unmistakably thin. By the spring of 1738, murmurs of Masonic lodges had grown so persistent in Roman cafes and foreign embassies that Pope Clement XII deemed a formal response unavoidable. On April 28, 1738, he promulgated the papal bull in Eminenti Apostolatus Specula, condemning membership in Masonic societies as grievous and scandalous, and threatening excommunication for any Catholic who persisted in secret oaths. The text of the bull declared that these lodges operated under masks of benevolence while concealing rites and teachings at odds with church doctrine. Clement XII, born Lorenzo Corsini, had witnessed Masonic lodges multiplying across Europe, drawing in noblemen, army officers, and even a handful of priests who were captivated by discussions of natural philosophy and personal liberty. For the pontiff, whose own career had been marked by zealous support of ecclesiastical discipline, the bull represented a necessary assertion of papal authority over clandestine fraternities. News of Eminenti spread swiftly beyond Rome's walls. Dispatches carried the decree to courts in Vienna, Paris, and Lisbon, prompting Catholic monarchs to ban lodge meetings and to arrest suspected Masons. Yet, enforcement proved uneven. In some regions, lodges simply rebranded themselves as philosophical societies, continuing to meet under different names while retaining familiar handshakes and symbols. In Rome, curiosity about these hidden ceremonies intensified in salons and among the literati, fueling speculation that the bull had granted the very secrecy it sought to ban. By the time Benedict XIV succeeded Clement XII in 1740, the Vatican archives were cluttered with letters from bishops pleading for guidance on identifying clandestine lodge members. Benedict's more measured approach involved issuing instructional notes to diocesan tribunals on how to apply the penalties described in Eminenti. Yet he refrained from expanding or renewing the bull itself. This cautious stance acknowledged both the persistence of lodge networks and the danger of driving inquisitive minds further underground. Even today, historians recognize that in Eminenti was not simply an act of blanket prohibition, but a pivotal moment when the Church first confronted organized societies dedicated to Enlightenment thought and personal conscience. In the shadowed alleys near the Tiber, a discreet gathering began to take shape as intrigued noblemen, foreign diplomats, and a handful of curious clerics answered a clandestine summons. They met in the vaulted basement of a repurposed palazzo, whose entrance was marked only by a weathered stone circle engraved with a square and compass. Within that hidden chamber, men swore solemn oaths on ancient tomes and lit oil lamps whose glow danced across stone pillars, casting long, flickering shadows. This was the Lodge of the Seven Hills, the first acknowledged Masonic lodge in the Eternal City, and its membership included individuals with direct lines to Vatican power among them. A chamberlain whose discreet access to private papal audiences lent the lodge an alarming proximity to the heart of the Holy See. Whispers of those midnight meetings traveled quickly through Rome's salons, carried by servants who spoke in hushed tones of ritual aprons, coded handshakes, and philosophical debates that ranged from the nature of divine providence to the promise of humanitarian reform. Word of Masonic involvement reached the ear of Pope Benedict XIV, a pontiff celebrated for his scholarly mind, yet uneasy about unauthorized fraternities within ecclesiastical circles. His advisors reported the discovery of ledger entries detailing contributions of glassware and candles paid for by an anonymous friend of the craft, documents hidden among church account books. Although the Pope stopped short of issuing a new edict, he ordered tighter control over the Vatican's guest registers and instructed the Swiss Guard to prevent unauthorized gatherings on church property. Despite these measures, the lodge's reputation only deepened. Accounts from confidential dispatches describe how renowned physicians and engineers participated in debates alongside cardinals, forging alliances that transcended traditional boundaries. Investigators found that some lodge members had even drafted proposals for charity schools, modeled on Masonic Principlesa vision that might have inspired social programs, but also threatened to undermine the Church's monopoly on education. As the lodge grew bolder, the question hung in the air. Were these men simply explorers of new ideas, or did their fellowship represent a calculated effort to weave Masonic influence into the fabric of Vatican governance? Not all Masonic activity in Rome unfolded under the flicker of candlelight or the solemn hush of vaulted basements. Some of the most tantalizing evidence of lodge influence emerged in the form of veiled correspondence exchanged between high-ranking prelates and leaders of foreign lodges. Letters surfaced carefully concealed within the bindings of theological treatises and disguised among diplomatic dispatches that bore the unmistakable imprint of the compass and square. One such missive, intercepted by the papal nuncio in Vienna and dated late 1797, urged an Italian cardinal to champion principles of religious toleration at the next consistory, promising support from French and English brethren in the shadows where truth often breathes. The cardinal in question, a respected scholar known for his treatises on canon law, had long advocated for moderate reform. His willingness to entertain secret overtures alarmed Rome's most cautious advisers. These coded messages often employed classical references, familiar to churchmen invocations of Virgil's Sibyl or echoes of Cicero's letters, yet beneath the erudition lay clearly articulated calls for gradual shifts in ecclesiastical policy. Vatican codebreakers, trained in the art of deciphering heretical texts, traced marginal annotations and subtle flourishes in the handwriting to known lodge correspondents in Paris and London. In response, Pope Pius VI ordered a meticulous review of all incoming and outgoing mail to the Secretariat of State, ensuring that any dispatch bearing the faintest sign of clandestine ink would be scrutinized. Even so, a number of letters slipped through, ending up in private collections or hidden among family archives of noble Roman households. Scholars today point to this exchange of secret letters as evidence, not merely of intellectual curiosity, but of a determined network seeking to influence decision-making at the highest levels of the Church. It was a silent communion that bridged marble corridors and distant lodge chamber-sand undercurrent of thought and persuasion that challenged the very idea of doctrinal unity. Beneath the gleaming frescoes and polished marble of the Curia, a network of whisperers passed secrets between the cloistered sanctums of the Vatican and Masonic lodges abroad. Among these intermediaries were several monsignors whose dual loyalties lay hidden behind solemn cassocks and courteous smiles. One such figure, remembered only through veiled references in diaries, provided Frederick, Grand Master of the Scottish Rite in Paris, with detailed accounts of the Pope's private deliberations on religious reform. Those entries, smuggled out of the apostolic palace in coded fragments sewn into liturgical robes, revealed discussions on expanding lay participation and reconsidering the Church's stance on emerging sciences. The very act of recording these conversations demonstrated a remarkable degree of access that no casual enthusiast could achieve. Rumors of secret audiences spread quickly among Rome's social elite. Salon hosts whispered about evenings when certain clerics slipped away from dinner to rendezvous with foreign envoys, emerging hours later with new manuscripts annotated in Masonic cipher. These clandestine gatherings often centered on comparative studies of charitable institutions run by lodges in London and social welfare projects patronized by German princes sympathetic to Enlightenment ideals. For Masonic leaders, such intelligence offered priceless insights into the levers of Vatican policy. For the Church, it represented an insidious breach of trust. When Pope Leo XII ascended the throne, he inherited both the prestige of his predecessors and the burden of ongoing infiltration. Although he lacked direct evidence to charge any cleric with treason, the sudden disappearance of key correspondences from the Vatican archives suggested a covert purge. Archival inventories noted the vanishing of several sealed bundles simply labeled miscellanea. By sealing the archives and restricting access to a handful of trusted officials, Leo XII aimed to restore the sanctity of papal confidentiality. Yet even these measures failed to stem the tide of rumors that lodge sympathizers continued to navigate the labyrinth of Vatican secrecy. The struggle between open inquiry and doctrinal fidelity had become a silent war fought in the quiet margins of history's grand narrative. The reach of Vatican authority extended not only through diplomacy and doctrine, but also through the formidable machinery of the Inquisition, whose tribunals slowly turned their gaze towards suspected lodge members in the early 19th century. Agents of the Holy Office, trained to root out heresy, were dispatched under the pretense of examining doctrinal errors, yet carried secret directives to probe any hint of Masonic affiliation. In one striking case, recorded in confidential Vatican reports, a respected priest was brought before inquisitorial judges after parishioners reported seeing him wearing a ring engraved with a compass and square in accusation, so grave that he was stripped of his vestments and held without communion for weeks. Though the priest insisted the ring was an heirloom passed down through generations, records reveal that multiple witnesses claimed to have heard him reciting unfamiliar oaths in whispered tones late at night in the sacristy. The tribunal's investigators combed his quarters for ritual implements and scoured his correspondence for coded phrases. Ultimately, he was forced to swear an oath of loyalty to the Pope and to renounce any association with secret societies, a concession that spared him from harsher penalties but left his reputation in tatters. Similar inquisitions targeted lay officials who managed church finances. One auditor was accused of funneling funds to charitable projects allegedly organized by Scottish Rites in Naples. Yet beyond the sensational trials lay a more subtle struggle. Inquisitors discovered that some lodge members sought to defend themselves not by denying membership, but by invoking shared Christian values, tolerance, charity, and a quest for moral improvement, framing their principles as extensions rather than contradictions of Catholic teaching. These arguments baffled inquisitorial theologians, for they suggested a convergence rather than a conflict between Masonic ethics and ecclesiastical doctrine. In response, the Holy Office issued internal guidelines clarifying that even the most laudable charitable acts could not excuse participation in societies bound by secret oaths. The Inquisition's pursuit of suspected Freemasons thus became both a demonstration of papal power and a revealing barometer of the tensions between secrecy, conscience, and confession within the Vatican itself. Deep within the Vatican's grand libraries, rows of leather-bound tomes and illuminated manuscripts chronicled centuries of Christian thought. But some volumes concealed margin notes and secret symbols that hinted at a different kind of pursuit. Freemasons, fascinated by the mysteries of antiquity, delved into subjects from Pythagorean mathematics to Hermetic alchemy, believing that hidden wisdom granted insight into both the physical and spiritual realms. When reports reached Rome that lodge members were exchanging diagrams of geometric proportions and arcane treatises on sacred architecture, theologians grew uneasy. They saw in these studies a kind of devotion that rivaled traditional prayer, a labyrinthine quest for divine truth outside the established sacramental hierarchy. Scholars visiting Rome's chancery recalled stumbling upon parchments annotated with the compass and square insignia tucked between papal bulls, as though an inquisitive hand had slipped Masonic commentary into the heart of official decrees. Some argued that this blending of esoteric lore and Christian symbolism offered fresh metaphors for unity and moral order, but church authorities feared it blurred the line between revelation and speculation. The excitement generated by these hidden manuscripts coincided with an upsurge in scientific inquiry across Europe, from experiments in electricity to advances in anatomical study. Freemasons saw no contradiction between faith and reason, but the Vatican regarded certain investigations, particularly those aimed at resurrecting ancient rites or interpreting scripture through numerology, as dangerously subversive. A memorandum drafted by the Congregation of the Index warned that lodge members might exploit such forbidden knowledge to undermine core doctrines. Citing a case in which a papal librarian was accused of hosting private salons where forbidden texts circulated alongside discussions of sacred geometry and symbolic initiation rituals. Though no formal trial ensued, the episode prompted an edict limiting access to key archives and reinforcing that study of mystical traditions must remain subject to ecclesiastical oversight. In the interplay of shadowed scholarship and guarded faith, one sees how the lure of hidden wisdom challenged the Vatican's understanding of authority, leaving an indelible mark on the ongoing dialogue between secret societies and sacred power. A scandal erupted in Rome when Cardinal Girolamo Serafini, once celebrated for his eloquence from the pulpit, was abruptly stripped of his offices and sent into exile following allegations of corruption and doctrinal dissent. Bitter and isolated after his disgrace, Serafini vanished from public view until whispers placed him within a clandestine gathering of men who welcomed him not as a fallen churchman but as a brother. The lodge that sheltered him was said to be composed of exiles and outcasts, drawn to Freemasonry's promise of equality and intellectual renewal. Here, Serafini found sympathetic ears for his critiques of ecclesiastical privilege and a platform to advocate for social welfare initiatives that he believed the Church had long neglected. He spoke of his visions for charitable hospitals and schools funded by princely donations and managed by lay committees under Masonic oversight. In return, lodge members offered him access to influential connections across Europe, including noble patrons who were eager to extend their own networks of power into Vatican affairs. Letters discovered decades later among Serafini's personal effects point to secret meetings in a villa outside the city walls, where men in clerical garb dined alongside lodge, initiates beneath frescoed ceilings. Agreements were reportedly sealed by ritual oaths sworn on both the Gospel and on volumes of Enlightenment philosophy. Though Serafini never regained his cardinal's red hat, his ideas continued to percolate among sympathetic younger clergy who admired his courage in challenging the Curia's entrenched hierarchy. Church authorities responded with renewed vigilance, dispatching undercover agents to lodge events and quietly monitoring Serafini's correspondence. Yet the alliance endured long enough to seed proposals that would later inform the Church's own charitable outreach programs during the 19th century. In the ambiguous territory between exile and advocacy, Serafini's alliance with the Freemasons exemplified the complex motives that drove some within the Vatican to seek fellowship beyond its sacred walls. In the labyrinthine depths beneath St. Peter's Basilica, where ancient stones bear witness to centuries of devotion, there lie forgotten vaults brimming with documents, relics, and the faint traces of hidden allegiances. It was in one such chamber that a team of archivists, cataloging neglected trunks of correspondence, stumbled upon a curious cache: parchment scrolls bearing meticulously drawn geometric figures, compasses, squares, interlaced circles nestled between decrees and sacramental registers. These symbols, unmistakably Masonic, had been carved with care, their faint ink surviving time's relentless march. Scholars who examined the scrolls noted that the verses inscribed around the figures paraphrased lines from Solomon's temple narratives in the Old Testament, a text revered by both Mason and cleric. What made the discovery all the more startling was their provenance. The scrolls were part of the Vatican's secret archives, ostensibly guarded with the utmost secrecy and accessible only to a handful of trusted officials. How they had come to rest in a corner, trunk overshadowed by more respectable tomes, remains the subject of debate. Some posit that a conscientious librarian, sympathetic to lodge ideals, interwove Masonic sketches among papal records as a quiet protest. Others argue the scrolls were seized from a suspected cleric and never formally catalogued. The scroll's ink, analyzed by later forensic experts, dated to the early 19th century, aligning with the era of heightened Masonic activity in Rome. Their intricate margins hinted at coded instructions for rituals, mapping out chamber layouts and lighting effects designed to evoke sacred geometry. When word of this find reached the Pope, he ordered an immediate review of vault inventories and directed that any documents bearing such emblems be segregated and reclassified as non-canonical. Yet whispers persisted that more Masonic annotations lay hidden in other vaults, waiting for a curious eye to uncover them. In the quiet hush of subterranean corridors, the discovery of these symbols in the Vatican's own archives underscored the enduring mystery of a fraternity that had, perhaps, etched its presence into the very foundations of the Church. Deep within the Vatican's labyrinth of parchment and vellum, a cadre of codebreakers labored in near-total secrecy, deciphering messages that threatened to undermine papal prerogatives. Recruited from among the finest linguists and scholars, these cryptologists employed techniques that echoed methods used by Prussian and French intelligence services, turning their keen eyes to intercept communications between lodge leaders and suspected sympathizers. Their workshop was a modest suite of chambers adjacent to the apostolic chancery, lined with shelves of cipher manuals, ebony desks strewn with quills, and candle holders carved into shapes reminiscent of compasses. When a sealed envelope arrived bearing the emblem of a square and compass instead of the papal seal, it would be delivered here, its contents transcribed and its codes methodically unraveled. In one famous instance, a coded dispatch addressed to an influential count was discovered to contain detailed instructions for covertly attending a conclave luncheon and discreetly placing proscribed pamphlets on attendees' chairs. The decrypt revealed names of several clerics who were identified for further questioning. Such revelations triggered swift action. Guards were dispatched to the Count's villa. He was expelled from the papal court, and his estates were searched for further evidence of lodge affiliation. Archivists later noted that entries recording these interventions were carefully scrubbed from public ledgers, leaving behind only redacted annotations. Scholars believe that the knowledge gleaned by these codebreakers informed the drafting of subsequent restrictions on private correspondence and influenced the design of new security protocols for diplomatic pouches. Yet even as Vatican cryptologists grew more adept, lodge operatives evolved their own cipher systems, employing polyalphabetic encryption and false leads to elude detection. This clandestine dance of codes and countersigns underscored a profound contest. The Vatican's struggle to preserve doctrinal unity through surveillance and interrogation, set against the Freemasons' quest for intellectual freedom through secret communications. In the interplay of hidden messages and silent watchers, one sees not only a battle of wits, but also a reflection of the era's shifting attitudes toward authority, privacy, and the right to exchange ideas beyond the gaze of institutional power. A sudden uproar swept through the Vatican when news arrived that a prominent Freemason leader had been formally denounced and expelled from the Eternal City, his lodger's credentials ripped from his hands by order of the Pope. This man, known to many as the Grand Master of the Scottish Rite's Italian lodges, had cultivated friendships among noble families, and even secured a private audience with the Secretary of State under the guise of discussing charity work. In truth, he arrived bearing an offer of alliance, mutual cooperation on social initiatives, in exchange for discreet influence over key appointments within the Curia. His name appeared in secret dispatches, alongside those of sympathetic monsignors, and his signature was found on petitions urging reform of church courts. When investigators revealed this breach, the Pope refused to countenance such duplicity. Vatican guards escorted the Grand Master from his residence within Vatican territory, and his Masonic apron and jewels were confiscated as contraband. Contemporary observers spoke of a dramatic scene in which the expelled Mason, standing on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, proclaimed his loyalty to both God and fraternity, before being whisked away by a carriage bound for exile. In the following weeks, the Vatican issued veiled threats to other lodge members still residing in Rome, warning that any who dared to negotiate with church officials would meet a similar fate. Yet some argue that the affair only deepened the lodge's resolve, transforming the Grand Master into a martyr whose public disgrace fueled underground support. Personal letters recovered decades later suggest that his exile letters were circulated among European lodges as a rallying cry, emboldening other Freemasons to continue their work in secret. The clash underscored the fragile equilibrium between overt authority and hidden influence, a reminder that even when the Vatican appeared victorious, the undercurrent of Masonic ambition flowed on, reshaping loyalties and leaving an indelible mark on the Church's approach to clandestine fraternities. In a covert directive whispered through the inner circles of the Vatican, a campaign commenced to eradicate any trace of Masonic influence from sacred spaces. Documents were seized, artworks hidden, and private libraries purged under the guise of protecting doctrinal integrity. Agents of the Secretariat of State moved like silent sentinels, visiting the Roman palaces of known sympathizers to requisition parchments and engravings. One evening, crates of papers bearing coded ledger entries and ritual sketches were loaded onto Vatican wagons and ferried to a secluded courtyard behind the Apostolic Palace. There, under torchlight and guarded by cloaked Swiss guards, the materials were consigned to pyres fashioned from broken pews and abandoned hymnals. Flames licked the night sky, sending embers spiraling toward the colonnades, as priests offered solemn prayers to cleanse corrupted texts. Among the charred remains were letters from exiled prelates, treatises on sacred geometry, and even a finely illustrated mural commission that depicted Solomon's temple with unmistakable Masonic symbols incorporated into its design. Witnesses spoke of a hush falling over Rome as black smoke coiled skyward, effacing evidence of lodge activity almost as soon as it had been recorded. Yet the suppression did more than obliterate artifacts. It sent a clear message that the Vatican would brook no challenge from secret fraternities. Still, rumors persisted that devoted Masons had anticipated the purge and spirited key manuscripts to safe houses in Florence and Naples. Their survival ensured that, although the Vatican could destroy visible signs of infiltration, it could not extinguish the ideas that had taken root. The clandestine burning illuminated a broader conflict between concealment and expression, revealing how fear of subversion can drive institutions to extreme measures. In the wake of the flames, the Church emerged with its public authority reaffirmed, but the embers of Masonic thought continued to smolder quietly, promising that even destruction could not fully eradicate the quest for hidden wisdom. Behind the grand facades of Renaissance churches and the echoing vaults of the Vatican's great basilicas, hidden lodges continued their work under the guise of charitable outreach. One such group, known among insiders as the Confraternity of Light, quietly organized relief efforts for destitute artisans and orphan children, funding workshops that taught trades ranging from carpentry to embroidery. Their operations mirrored Masonic values of benevolence and self-improvement, yet the Vatican perceived these initiatives as an encroachment on the Church's traditional role as provider of social welfare. When reports reached the Pope that organizers were distributing alms with the insignia of the compass and square stitched into cloth bags, alarm bells rang in the corridors of power. Cardinal prefects were dispatched to investigate, posing as benefactors while they scrutinized records and questioned beneficiaries about the network's leadership. They discovered that confraternity funds flowed in part from wealthy lodge patrons abroad, who saw these programs as a means of expanding influence at the local level. The cardinal investigators also noted that younger clergy priests and seminarians were volunteering in these workshops, drawn by the promise of practical service rather than doctrinal instruction. A confidential dossier described one priest who, after months of participation, proudly displayed a hand-drawn certificate conferring upon him the degree of fellowcraft, a recognition typically reserved for lodge members. This symbolic crossover, where religious vestments brushed against Masonic regalia, struck Vatican officials as a profound breach of boundaries. In response, the Church launched an alternative network of confraternities under direct episcopal oversight, ensuring that all charitable activities bore only ecclesiastical seals, and that lay involvement was mediated through parish councils. Despite this effort, the Confraternity of Light adapted by merging with other clandestine societies and relocating its workshops to private villas beyond papal jurisdiction. Their determination to serve the poor while preserving Masonic identity underscored a deeper truth, that the drive for social reform and personal growth could not be silenced by edict alone. In the silent exchange of compassion and ingenuity, the Confraternity of Light exemplified how Freemasonry's most enduring influence lay not in conspiracy, but in the quiet power of shared purpose. In a quiet antechamber of the Apostolic Palace, a whispered rumor took shape. Pope, it was said, had invited a Masonic thinker to discuss the feasibility of a charitable reform that would align church outreach with Enlightenment ideals. This unconventional meeting allegedly took place under Pope Pius IX, a pontiff known for his intellectual curiosity and initial openness to modern ideas during the 1840s. According to fragmentary diary entries from a trusted chamberlain, the guest was a man of letters reputed to have served as grand orator of a prominent Italian lodge. He arrived bearing a bound manuscript outlining proposals for vocational schools, public libraries, and medical clinics, all to be administered through a joint committee of clergy and lay experts. The Chamberlain's notes described the Pope as listening intently, his brow furrowed not in anger but in contemplation, as the visitor spoke of harnessing Masonic networks to expedite charitable projects in newly industrializing cities. Yet the meeting ended without any formal decision. The manuscript vanished into the Pope's private archives and was never officially referenced. Scholars debate whether Pius IX's later conservatism and his denial of lay participation in governance reflected disillusionment with this encounter or broader political pressures following the revolutions of 1848. Whatever the truth, the story of a pope and a mason seated in earnest dialogue illustrates a moment when shared concern for social welfare temporarily bridged the gulf between sacred tradition and secular fraternity. In ecclesiastical corridors, whispers linger that Pius IX secretly commissioned further research papers that remain classified to this day, while lodge records from Florence note a confidential audience granted to their envoy. This fleeting collaboration, real or apocryphal, highlights how the pursuit of reform occasionally led popes to the very doorsteps they had condemned, testing the bounds of authority and compromise. Under the cloak of night, a lavish banquet unfolded in a secluded wing of an aristocratic villa near the Vatican, where Masonic initiates and curial aides convened around a long table draped in crimson cloth. Flickering candelabras cast moving patterns across vaulted ceilings as gourmet dishes, roasted pheasant, candied fruits, and spiced wines were served by silent attendants. Guests reclined on carved chairs bearing discreet lodge insignia, their conversation drifting from charity to theology, philosophy, and the subtle tensions between church doctrine and Enlightenment thought. At the center of the gathering sat a Monsignor renowned for his theological writings, whose recent treatise on natural law had drawn both admiration and suspicion from fellow clergy. Beside him, a respected lodge officer shared anecdotes of grand lodges in Edinburgh and Vienna, illustrating parallels between Masonic rites and ancient Christian initiation customs. As midnight approached, the host rose to propose a toast to the harmony of reason and faith, lifting a crystal goblet etched with a compass. The room erupted in murmured assent, yet in the hush that followed, the host revealed the evening's true purpose: to forge a discreet alliance whereby select priests would assist lodge-backed schools and hospitals, and in return, lodge members would advocate for ecclesiastical candidates sympathetic to moderate reform. An undertone of excitement rippled through the attendees, but so did a sense of peril should word of this accord leak. Both parties risked excommunication or political reprisal. Amid the clink of silverware and soft strains of a string quartet, an unspoken pact was sealed, witnessed only by candles and the distant rumble of church bells. When dawn neared, guests departed through hidden exits, leaving behind empty goblets and the faint scent of orange blossoms. Rumors of the midnight banquet soon reached Vatican insiders, triggering inquiries that uncovered only scattered fragments dining menus, embossed with lodge emblems, charred invitations burned in a fireplace, and a lone journal entry that read simply, "Alliances forged in darkness shape the light of tomorrow." In the hush before dawn, beneath the shadowed arches of an unused crypt near St. Peter's, a select group of clerics slipped into Masonic regalia, their cassocks concealed beneath dark ceremonial aprons. These men-priests of varied rank had grown disillusioned with the rigidity of ecclesiastical hierarchy and felt drawn to the lodge's promise of personal enlightenment. As the flicker of lantern light revealed carved stone alcoves, they murmured the familiar words of initiation, pledging mutual support and adherence to principles of brotherhood that transcended ecclesiastical titles. The air was thick with incense and anticipation, punctuated only by the echo of solemn oaths and the soft scrape of sandals against cold marble. After the ritual, they gathered in a hidden sacristy to share a simple supper of bread and wine, symbolically uniting sacrament and symbolism. Over that meal, plans took shape for discreet gatherings in parish halls where priests would teach Masonic moral philosophy alongside catechism, creating a new form of lay instruction that blended ritual drama with scriptural reflection. Word of these clandestine rites eventually filtered back to senior church officials when an acolyte inadvertently left a ceremonial lodge glove in a sacristy drawer. The glove, embroidered with a compass and square, was discovered during a routine inventory and sent to the congregation of the council for analysis. Facing undeniable evidence, the prefect issued an internal memorandum condemning any clerical participation in extraneous fraternities, and mandated that bishops conduct private inquiries within their dioceses. Some priests renounced their participation to protect their ministries, while others vanished from parish records, absorbed into the broader network of lodges outside Vatican jurisdiction. Though the affair remained unpublished in any official chronicle, whispers of rituals in the ruble, a phrase coined by one disenchanted Monsignor, persisted among those who remembered the melding of Catholic solemnity and Masonic ceremony. The episode underscored how the lines between sacred ordination and secret initiation could blur, challenging the Church's definitions of devotion and loyalty. As the continent convulsed under the tremors of revolution in the mid-19th century, whispers reached the Vatican that Freemasons were stirring unrest in the streets of Rome and beyond. Their lodges had become hubs of political discussion, where notions of republican government and civil liberties were debated alongside rituals of moral uplift. Members included disaffected nobles, disillusioned bureaucrats, and a surprising number of clergy who saw in Masonic ideals a pathway to modernize papal states' institutions. Secret meetings convened in borrowed drawing rooms and private theaters, where maps were spread across tables and emissaries from Milan, Venice, and Naples shared intelligence on popular uprisings. It was said that lodge envoys brought news of barricades in Paris and forced the Pope's advisors to consider reforms, constitutional charters, freedom of the press, and Catholic support for limited suffrage in order to quell the growing tide of discontent. Leaks of these discussions filtered back to the Apostolic Palace through informants who blurred the lines between political intrigue and spiritual counsel. A confidential report described a Masonic proposal to fund educational initiatives that would teach civic virtue alongside religious instruction, hoping to cultivate loyal citizens rather than rebellious subjects. Though Pope Pius IX initially flirted with liberal reforms and even granted a constitution in 1848, he soon recoiled, repudiating his concessions after witnessing violence and anarchic slogans scrawled on church doors. The brief flirtation with constitutional governance left the Vatican wary of any association with secret societies that might leverage popular fervor against papal authority. In the aftermath, lists of suspected lodge members who had championed reform were circulated among diocesan offices, and several priests were quietly reassigned to remote parishes. Yet the spirit of that revolutionary moment endured within the lodges, inspiring Masonic chapters to continue advocating for social progress in quiet solidarity with lay reformers. The uneasy truce that followed underscored a central dilemma. Freemasonry's push for political and social change could not be entirely dismissed without risking further alienation from emerging modern movements, even as the Church sought to preserve its ancient prerogatives. In a conclave cloaked in ritual and secrecy, the cardinals of the Holy See gathered to elect a new pope, their white smoke a public signal of deliberations complete. Yet, Amidst the solemn prayers and ancient chants, rumors fluttered through the corridors that Masonic influence had subtly swayed the outcome. According to private memoirs of a Swiss Guard captain, a small group of lodge-sympathetic cardinals had met in a hidden parlor on the edge of Vatican Gardens to compare notes on preferred candidates. They reportedly exchanged discreet nods and hand signals during general congregations, signaling allies in rival factions. Whispers suggested that certain votes were cast not solely on theological merits or pastoral experience, but on a candidate's perceived openness to modern ideas championed by Freemasons' religious toleration, educational reform, and support for scientific inquiry. Though no formal evidence emerged, the very notion of an external fraternity shaping the election flickered like a half-spoken heresy among devoted traditionalists. In the aftermath, the newly elected pontiff, known for his moderate views, surprised many observers by appointing advisors with reputations for intellectual curiosity rather than strict conservatism. This decision fueled speculation that lodge sympathizers had indeed facilitated his rise, ensuring that the Church might adopt a more measured approach to modern challenges. Vatican insiders countered that the Pope's selections reflected his own vision for renewal, not Masonic scheming. Nevertheless, the episode marked a turning point in how Church leaders regarded the interplay between secret societies and sacred processes. It underscored the enduring question of whether the conclave's sacred rituals could remain impervious to the subtle currents of influence flowing in from beyond St. Peter's doors. A hushed panic spread through the Vatican archives when an entire cabinet of documents vanished overnight, leaving only empty shelves and whispers of what had been lost. The missing materials were said to include letters from exiled cardinals, draft manuscripts outlining secret Masonic negotiations with high-ranking prelates, and detailed minutes from covert meetings that charted strategies for influencing papal policy. These records had been assembled over decades by archivists and inquisitors alike, locked behind iron doors and sealed with the papal crest. Yet, one morning, during a routine inspection, the chief archivist found the cabinet ajar and its contents gone without a trace. Investigation revealed that the keys to the archive were never used, suggesting an inside job by someone with intimate knowledge of both the vault's design and the movements of Vatican staff. Suspicion fell on a junior librarian whose access logs showed late-night entries without official summons. He vanished before questioning could commence, and subsequent searches of his quarters yielded only fragments of torn parchment. Rumors circulated that he had spirited the documents to a sympathetic lodge in Florence, where they were meant to serve as bargaining chips in negotiations with influential Italian magnates. The loss of these papers was more than bureaucracy in disarray. It represented the erasure of hard-won insights into the lodge's reach within the Holy See. In response, the Pope ordered the installation of new locks, the reassignment of personnel, and the implementation of a rotation system for archive guardians. Yet, the truly damning content never reappeared, and Vatican chroniclers quietly noted the disappearance in footnotes that offered no explanation. Historians later pieced together references to the lost archive from foreign diplomatic reports that lamented the inability to corroborate claims of Masonic infiltration without those primary sources. Some believe that among the lost trove was a comprehensive ledger of lodge curial correspondence, a document that might have irrevocably altered public understanding of the Vatican's internal struggles. Its absence left a void in the historical record, a silent testament to the lengths both sides would go to protect their secrets or wield them as power. In the hushed corners of the Apostolic Palace, legend tells of a single individual whose dual allegiance to Freemasonry and to the Holy See granted him unparalleled access to the Vatican's innermost workings. Known only by the cryptic alias Sylvanus, This shadowy figure served as secretary to the Secretary of State, a position that allowed him to observe and transcribe confidential deliberations on everything from diplomatic dispatches to doctrinal debates. Silvanus's true loyalty, however, lay with the lodge. Dispatches intercepted by papal codebreakers reveal that he secretly forwarded summaries of key discussions to a network of Masonic leaders in Paris and London, marking which cardinals were most amenable to lodge sympathies and which would resist any notion of reform. His methods were subtle. A margin note here, an overnight copy of a private memorandum there each, conveyed just enough information to guide Masonic strategy without arousing immediate suspicion. Rumors of his treachery reached the ears of Pope Leo XIII, who, in an unprecedented move, ordered a special inquiry within the Secretariat of State. Yet Silvanus vanished before the Inquisition could begin, slipping away through hidden corridors and emerging days later under an assumed name in Florence, where he was said to have been celebrated by lodge members as a hero of the craft. Even after his departure, the impact of his espionage lingered. Several Vatican appointments aligned suspiciously with the profiles he had marked as sympathetic to the fraternity's ideals. Church historians point to this episode as a defining moment when Freemasonry's penetration into Vatican bureaucracy became undeniable. It underscored the vulnerability of the Holy See's information networks and highlighted the potency of secret alliances in shaping the leadership of the Church. While Silvanus's true identity remains lost to history, the legacy of his duplicity serves as a cautionary tale about the fine line between service and subversion. Within the cathedral's soaring arches and beneath the gaze of countless crucifixes, a silent contest of symbols unfolded as the ornate cross of Christendom met the unassuming compass of the lodge. Both emblems carried profound meaning for their bearers. The cross, a testament to sacrifice and redemption, and the compass, a reminder of moral boundaries and measured conduct. In Vatican workshops where artisans produced liturgical objects, rumors swirled that a handful of chalices and processional staffs incorporated discrete compass motifs alongside traditional iconography. These adaptations were subtly slight curvature here, an extra loop there, yet they sparked heated debate once discovered. Critics argued that any incorporation of Masonic imagery, however minor, sullied the sanctity of sacramental vessels and risked confusing the faithful. Proponents countered that the compass's geometric precision echoed divine order, complementing rather than contradicting Christian doctrine. The clash reached a crescendo when a newly commissioned monstrance, intended for solemn processions in St. Peter's Square, was found to bear a compass flanked by angels. The scandal ignited a flurry of correspondence between the papal master of ceremonies and the congregation of rites, culminating in a rare public statement affirming that no symbol other than the cross and its accepted variants could grace the Church's most sacred artifacts. Yet, the incident revealed an undercurrent of negotiation between two worldviews, one rooted in ancient theological tradition and the other in Enlightenment era symbolism. Across Europe, Masonic lodges watched these developments with keen interest, hosting lectures on the compatibility of sacred geometry and Christian mysteries. Some lodge members even published pamphlets arguing that the compass and square had biblical foundations, tracing their origins to the measurements of Solomon's temple described in the Old Testament. These treatises were widely circulated in Rome's intellectual circles, inviting further scrutiny by church authorities. Ultimately, the contest between cross and compass illustrated more than a mere battle of images. It embodied the broader struggle over who held the authority to define sacred truth, and how far secular fraternities might reshape the visual language of faith. When dawnlight seeped through the stained glass windows of parish churches, some priests discovered incongruous objects left in their sacristies alone in the night. A young vicar in Trastevere awoke to find a small wooden box resting atop the silver cruet. Inside lay a worn leather apron embossed with a compass and square, its straps frayed from clandestine use. He recognized the apron from whispered descriptions of lodge regalia and spent hours wrestling with guilt and curiosity before finally presenting it to his bishop. In another village near the Vatican gardens, a sacristan preparing vestments for morning mass noticed fresh scratches on the wooden kneeler, forming two intersecting lines that matched the emblem of speculative masonry. He could not explain how the marks appeared overnight, in a room otherwise locked. Stories circulated of priests discovering peculiar pamphlets slipped beneath hymnals, each page adorned with philosophical essays praising the dignity of human reason alongside devotional prayers. One elderly curate confessed to having found a small metallic badge bearing the square and compass tucked beneath altar linens. He kept it hidden in his cassock pocket, fearing both scandal and reprisal. These incidents prompted a discreet inquiry by the Camerlengo, who instructed parish priests to inspect their sacristies each morning and report any anomalies directly to the Secretariat of State. Yet many accounts never reached official files, passed instead through informal networks of clerical confidants who debated whether these deliveries represented attempts to recruit or simply invitations to dialogue. Some priests felt flattered by what they interpreted as recognition of shared moral aims, while others were certain they faced spiritual danger. In a few instances, local bishops quietly retrieved the items and ordered them burned, believing that symbols of secret societies had no place alongside holy vessels. Even so, the memory of those sacrilegious visits lingered, fueling conversations about the permeability of sacred spaces and the allure of fraternities that sought to blend ritual with service. The tales from the sacristy remain a testament to how easily boundaries could blur when midnight hands tapped on locked doors and slipped their messages into the heart of Catholic worship. Word of a Vatican insider secretly initiated into Freemasonry spread like embers through dry tinder, igniting both fascination and indignation within ecclesiastical circles. The man at the center of the storm was Father Antonio Moretti, a scholar priest renowned for his eloquent sermons on church tradition and scripture. Yet colleagues whispered that Moretti had attended late-night lodge meetings in a villa on the Janiculum Hill, donning Masonic regalia beneath his cassock before returning to celebrate Mass at dawn. His initiation allegedly occurred after an encounter with a traveling Scottish Rite emissary who admired Moretti's lectures on moral philosophy and invited him to explore the lodge's intellectual fellowship. Once initiated, Moretti was said to have studied in private the fraternity's teachings on natural law, charting perceived parallels between Masonic ethics and the Church's social doctrine. His sermons took on new flourishes, drawing on themes of personal conscience and human dignity that resonated with lodge principles. When rumors reached cardinal prefects, an investigation ensued. Letters seized from Moretti's desk revealed references to lodge degrees and coded instructions to prepare for a transition of light. Under pressure, Moretti penned a letter of renunciation, affirming his exclusive loyalty to the Vatican and denouncing secret societies. The letter was read aloud at a diocesan synod, where he publicly burned his Masonic apron before the assembly. Yet, despite the spectacle, whispers persisted that Moretti continued his lodge ties in secret, his true motives obscured by his outward compliance. Some parishioners reported finding Masonic leaflets among confessionals and hearing faint echoes of lodge rituals drifting from hidden vestries. Moretti's case became emblematic of the delicate dance between conviction and conformity within the church how. A priest could embrace intellectual companionship beyond the altar and yet be compelled to repudiate it to preserve ecclesiastical standing. His story underscored the enduring power of Freemasonry's appeal to mind and heart, even within the heart of Catholic devotion. In the ornate confines of a private Roman palazzo, an ambitious lodge, sympathetic cardinal, devised a plan to mirror the structure of Freemasonry's graded degrees within the Church's own hierarchy. Drawing inspiration from the lodge's system of entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason, this cleric proposed a series of spiritual advancement, recognitions that would honor priests for their theological scholarship, pastoral service, and administrative leadership. Detailed notes found in the cardinal's personal journal outline, initial ceremonies each ritual, incorporating scripture readings, symbolic gestures, and the presentation of custom medallions bearing slowly diminishing numbers of rays emanating from a central star. Enthusiastic supporters argued that such a system could incentivize clergy to pursue deeper study and foster a sense of unity across dioceses, much as Masonic degrees created bonds among lodge members. Yet critics saw an insidious parallel, a church adopting the very framework intended to bind Freemasons in secret fellowship. When drafts of the proposal reached the office of the Secretariat of State, advisors recognized that even casual implementation could blur distinctions between ecclesiastical honors and lodge initiations. They cautioned that private recognition ceremonies risked becoming de facto Masonic rites under a new guise, potentially undermining the Church's sacramental focus. The cardinal in question faced intense scrutiny. His diary was seized and subsequently disappeared from the archive, and he was quietly reassigned to a remote diocese far from Rome. Though official records cite only a routine administrative transfer, lodge dispatches celebrated the cardinal's promotion to distant stewardship, interpreting it as a strategic repositioning that would allow continued coordination with sympathetic clergy. The episode underscored how the structure of Masonic degreeso, meticulously designed to mark stages of moral and philosophical growth, could influence church insiders seeking to renew clerical commitment. In the delicate interplay of graded honors and hidden affiliations, the line between imitation and infiltration became dangerously thin. In the silent tunnels of Rome's ancient catacombs, where pilgrims once sought burial and solace, modern explorers uncovered signs of a different kind of fraternity, Masonic lodges carved into the stone beneath the city. During a discreet excavation in 1902, laborers working under the direction of a Vatican-appointed antiquarian stumbled upon clustered chambers lined with geometric carvings, interlaced circles, squares, and compensate into walls that had long been dismissed as natural fissures. The passages led to a vaulted room, whose low ceiling bore the faint outline of a square and compass enclosing a stylized sunburst. Though initially cloaked in silence, news of the find spread among theologians and Masons alike, spurring speculation that these chambers once served as hidden meeting places for lodge initiates seeking refuge from inquisitorial scrutiny. In the decades that followed, a handful of scholarly articles appeared in academic journals, often under pseudonyms describing the site's dual significance as both Christian sepulchre and clandestine lodge. One theory held that excommunicated priests and lay Freemasons collaborated to repurpose ancient catacombs as an underground sanctuary where rituals could proceed unobserved beneath the Vatican's very foundations. Others argued that the symbols dated to a later era, carved by Enlightenment-era Masons eager to connect their fraternity with Rome's earliest Christian heritage. The Vatican's response was measured. Rather than ordering a purge of the chambers, church archaeologists conducted further studies, publishing findings that emphasized the catacombs' primary Christian function while acknowledging the presence of additional carvings of uncertain origin. The decision not to obliterate the symbols reflected both a recognition of the site's historical value and a subtle concession that such hidden spaces lay beyond the Church's full control. Today, the catacombs stand as a testament to the intertwined paths of faith and fraternity, where the quest for sacred tradition and the pursuit of secret wisdom converge in the cool hush of subterranean shadows. As the 20th century dawned, the Vatican found itself navigating a delicate balance between the condemnation of secret societies and the necessity of diplomatic engagement with modern nations whose leaders counted high-ranking Freemasons among their ranks. When Italian lodges extended invitations to Vatican envoys to attend lectures on international law and charitable collaboration, the Secretariat of State faced a quandary: refuse and risk alienating secular governments, or accept and risk leaked reports of fraternization with banned societies. In one remarkable instance, a papal diplomat stationed in Lisbon received a personal invitation from the Grand Orient Lodge to observe a ceremony on the eve of All Saints' Day. Though the invitation was sent through formal diplomatic channels, its seal bore the unmistakable compass and square. The nuncio, a seasoned jurist, hesitated but ultimately declined, citing the persistent prohibition against Masonic affiliation. Nonetheless, his aide discreetly attended under an assumed name, filing a confidential dispatch that marveled at the lodge's rigorous charity. Projects, including schools for orphans and free medical clinics offering modern treatments. Upon learning of this breach, the Pope's cabinet issued stern instructions that no member of the Holy See's diplomatic corps was to engage with lodge activities under any pretense, reinforcing the Church's official stance, even as practitioners within the Curia continued to study Masonic structures for insights into organizational efficiency. Meanwhile, foreign ambassadors lobbied discreetly for greater tolerance, arguing that dialogue with Freemasons could advance humanitarian causes without undermining doctrine. The tug-of-war between diplomatic pragmatism and doctrinal purity played out in private memoranda and late-night consultations, leaving the Vatican's public posture unchanged even as its internal debates raged on. This episode highlighted the Vatican's dual role as spiritual authority and sovereign entity, its need to uphold canonical law while engaging with a world where secret fraternity ties often intersected with political power. In the tension between rejection and engagement, the Holy See's cautious diplomacy underscored the inescapable reality that Freemasonry's influence extended far beyond hidden lodgicet, penetrated the highest levels of international society, challenging the Vatican to reconcile principle with practice. When the Second Vatican Council convened in 1962, the Catholic Church embarked on an unprecedented journey of modernization, opening its doors to dialogue with the contemporary world. Amid debates on liturgical reform and ecumenism, a quiet faction within the Curia argued that engagement with Freemasonry law, condemned as incompatible with church teaching, might yield valuable perspectives on lay participation and social justice. According to confidential notes from a mid-council meeting, several theological advisors considered commissioning a comparative study of Masonic charitable models to inform the Church's own outreach programs. These proposals, however, met fierce resistance from traditionalists who recalled past episodes of infiltration and the persistent insistence of papal bulls forbidding Masonic membership. Ultimately, the Council's decrees refrained from explicitly addressing Freemasonry, choosing instead to promote general principles of religious freedom and human dignity that, ironically, echoed some Masonic ideals. In the years that followed, local bishops in Europe and the Americas grappled with how to apply the Council's spirit of openness without contravening canonical prohibitions. In a few dioceses, clergy reported discreet encounters with lodge members at interfaith conferences on poverty relief and disaster response events sponsored by civic authorities keen to include diverse charitable actors. Bishops, torn between pastoral zeal and canonical caution, issued pastoral guidelines emphasizing collaboration on specific social projects, while maintaining a firm theological boundary against secret oaths. Meanwhile, Masonic lodges interpreted the Council's emphasis on dialogue as tacit permission to continue whispered overtures, dispatching envoys to Catholic charities and theological institutes. These gestures prompted renewed scrutiny by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which reaffirmed the 1983 Code of Canon Laws declaration that faithful who join Masonic associations remain in a state of grave sin. The tug of war between Vatican openness and doctrinal steadfastness underscored how, even in an era of reform, the question of Freemasonry's place relative to the Church remained unresolved, a testament to the enduring power of secret societies to influence the course of ecclesiastical policy. In the wake of Vatican II's call for ecumenical dialogue, a subtle thaw appeared between the Church and certain secular organizations. Yet Freemasonry remained conspicuously absent from formal engagement. Still, individual clergy and lay theologians who had once hesitated recognized that Masonry's emphasis on charity and moral uprightness could complement Catholic social teaching. Quietly, they began attending public lectures hosted by civic lodges on topics such as prison reform, public health, and adult education. These events, open to all but organized by mysterious fraternities, bound by secret rituals, drew surprisingly large Catholic audiences. Local bishops, vigilant yet pragmatic, issued pastoral letters reminding faithful that attendance did not equate to membership so long as no oaths were taken and no lodge regalia donned. In some cities, collaborative partnerships emerged. Catholic relief organizations and lodge charities pooled resources to aid flood victims, each side respecting the other's autonomy. Though these alliances operated in daylight, whispers circulated that lodge members used the goodwill generated by joint projects to recruit sympathizers into their deeper rites. Correspondence between lodge masters and sympathetic priests know, archived but still under restricted access details, strategies for nurturing mutual respect while preserving the fraternity's distinct identity. A notable example occurred in Milan, where a prominent lay Catholic scholar facilitated a symposium on faith and fraternal service, encouraging exchange but steering clear of proselytism. Neither side formally acknowledged any grand Masonic plot. Rather, they emphasized shared humanitarian goals. Yet traditionalists saw in these developments the echo of centuries-old fears that Freemasonry's moral appeal might gradually erode doctrinal fidelity. The Vatican responded by reaffirming its ban on Catholic membership in Masonic organizations, a stance reiterated by Pope John Paul II in a 1985 Declaration on Masonic Associations, which underscored that the two allegiances remained irreconcilable. The chapter of collaboration thus closed as swiftly as it opened, leaving behind a complex legacy of cautious cooperation, unspoken tensions, and the ever-present question of how far the Church could walk alongside a fraternity sworn to secrecy. In the hushed cloisters of the Vatican's Theological Institute, a small cadre of scholars embarked on an ambitious project to catalog every reference to secret societies in Church history and discern whether any parallels to Freemasonry could inform contemporary pastoral practice. Their efforts, conducted under a veil of confidentiality, yielded surprising insights. They noted that medieval confraternities lay brotherhoods, dedicated to works of mercy, had once flourished under the Church's aegis, bound by rituals and symbols that echoed Masonic structure. These confraternities, while never condemned, had laid the groundwork for cooperative service that transcended strict clerical control. By tracing the evolution of these medieval societies alongside the rise of modern lodges, the scholars argued that the Church's own tradition of lay engagement had occasionally mirrored the promises of fraternity that Freemasonry championed. Yet, When their draft report reached the Congregation for the Clergy, it was met with reticence. Officials feared that such comparisons might inadvertently legitimize the lodge's claims to a parallel spiritual authority. The report's most contentious section detailed the striking resemblance between the symbolic stages of medieval initiation marked by pilgrim staff, cord, and clasped hands and the degrees of entered apprentice and fellowcraft. It also observed that early papal endorsements of confraternities had affirmed the value of communal rituals in fostering moral reform, a principle later appropriated by Masonic founders. Although the scholars had intended their study as a historical analysis, curial advisors interpreted it as a theological endorsement of lodge practices, leading to the report's suppression. Nevertheless, leaks of its findings circulated among academic circles, sparking heated debates at major Catholic universities. Some theologians used the insights to advocate for reinvigorating the Church's own lay associations, free from secrecy, yet rich in symbolic depth. Others cautioned that the very act of drawing parallels risked blurring the line between licit devotional societies and prohibited fraternities. In its unapproved form, the project underscored an enduring tension: the Church's need to engage lay energy and ritual expression while guarding against alternative sources of spiritual authority. Throughout the early 20th century, conspiracy theories wove intricate narratives linking Vatican Freemason collusion to seismic global events, world wars, revolutions, and financial crash. Yet behind these sensational claims lay kernels of historical truth. Political analysts noted that certain European monarchies, notably in France and Italy, had Masonic lodges whose members included high-ranking nobility and influential bankers. These lodges sometimes lobbied for diplomatic interventions during crises, and their proximity to both royal courts and Vatican envoys fueled speculation of a clandestine alliance. In the aftermath of World War I, archival correspondence revealed that lodge representatives approached Vatican diplomats to coordinate relief efforts for war-torn populations, offering support networks that spanned embattled territories. While the Vatican appreciated the humanitarian assistance, conservative cardinals decried any liaison with secret societies, fearing it might confer political leverage over the Holy See. Meanwhile, in revolutionary Mexico, anti-clerical Masonic lodges openly agitated against church privileges, leading to violent confrontations known as the Cristero Wars. Church leaders characterized Freemasonry there as fundamentally hostile to Catholicism, contrasting sharply with the more discreet European lodges that championed social stability. These divergent expressions of Masonry underscored a critical point: the fraternity's impact varied by region and ideology. Yet conspiracy-minded writers drew sweeping conclusions, suggesting a single global Masonic papal conspiracy shaping world history. Such theories found traction during the financial turmoil of 1929, when rumors of Masonic manipulation in Vatican financial holdings circulated alongside mainstream concerns over bank failures. Though later investigations found no evidence of illicit collusion, the persistence of these myths highlighted the potent allure of secret society narratives, especially when woven into complex political and economic upheavals. In scrutinizing these modern theories, historians caution against simplistic cause and effect assumptions. They argue that while Freemasons and Vatican officials occasionally intersected in humanitarian and diplomatic contexts, the depth of actual infiltration differed widely across eras and locales. The tangled web of rumor, ideology, and selective evidence thus became a testament to the enduring power of Masonic conspiracies in the collective imagination. Even as scholarly inquiry sought to disentangle fact from fiction. In an elegant workshop near Piazza Navona, an artisan renowned for crafting ceremonial robes, received an unusual commission: a set of luxurious silk vestments embroidered with intricate silver thread depicting compass and square motifs intertwined with vine leaves. The client, cloaked in anonymity, specified that the garments were intended for exclusive use at a study circle of clergy and laymen devoted to philosophical and charitable endeavors. Word of the commission reached the papal master of ceremonies, who viewed the fusion of Masonic symbols with liturgical attire as an unsettling breach of sacramental propriety. An inspection of the robes revealed that the compass and square emblems were subtly integrated into the decorative borders of the chasubles, requiring careful scrutiny to detect. The master of ceremonies alerted the congregation of rites, prompting an urgent decree. No vestment-bearing non-ecclesiastical iconography could be worn during any official liturgy. When the work was presented at a private gathering of sympathetic clergy, it was quietly confiscated and placed in storage, never to grace an altar. Yet, fragments of the silk embroidery found their way into Masonic newsletters, where lodge members hailed the commission as evidence of growing clerical appreciation for their symbolic art. Those newsletters described how the vestments had been intended for use at a series of charitable masses open to lay participants, aiming to blend ritual solemnity with public outreach modeled on lodge-sponsored philanthropy. The episode underscored a key dynamic of Vatican Masonic interactions: the contested terrain of visual symbolism and the potency of shared imagery to bridge, or to divide, two worlds. While the Church defended the sanctity of its vestments, Freemasons saw in the embroidery a hopeful sign of rapprochementa, melding of faith and fraternity through the universal language of symbols. In the interplay of silk and silver thread, one witnesses how the aesthetics of ritual became yet another frontier in the centuries-long dialogue between secret society and sacred tradition. Behind the heavy doors of the Sistine Chapel, where cardinal electors convene in sacred secrecy to choose a successor to St. Peter, legend insists that Freemasonry's subtle influence once extended even into the conclave's hallowed rituals. According to confidential recollections recorded by a retired Swiss Guard captain, in the early 20th century, a small faction of cardinals, sympathetic to lodge ideals, devised private hand signals to convey support for a candidate during general congregations. These gestures on almost imperceptible shift of the scapular, or a slight tilt of the biretta resembled the coded communications taught in Masonic lodges. Whispered testimony suggests that during one conclave, a discreet note bearing a compass motif was smuggled into the chapel tucked within a missal, serving as a reminder of shared moral commitments among certain electors. Although no formal record of such incidents survives in the Vatican archives, subsequent papal appointments reflected an unexpectedly progressive tenor that some observers attributed to these unseen pressures. In the aftermath, the Holy See tightened conclave procedures, banning all external notes, scrubbing chapel furnishings of any extraneous markings, and instructing scrutineers to watch for unusual behavior. Yet, seasoned insiders point out that the conclave's very secrecy and blind voting system, designed to protect the freedom of the Holy Spirit, unintentionally mirrored the lodge's emphasis on insulated deliberation. The interplay of ritual silence, symbolic gestures, and concealed ballots underscored a shared valorization of confidentiality, even as their aims diverged. Scholars note that while the Church's conclave rituals seek divine guidance, Masonic ceremonies invoke philosophical enlightenment. Both, however, rely on controlled environments where the external world cannot intrude. This convergence of method, if not of motive, reveals how the machinery of influence, even when unacknowledged, can shape outcomes in the most guarded of settings. In reflecting on the conclave's parallels with lodge practices, one confronts the enduring question of how human networks wield power when they operate behind closed doors. A discreet yet formidable intelligence apparatus emerged within the Vatican as an unmistakable reaction to the persistent rumor of Masonic infiltration. This elite unit, staffed by veteran members of the Swiss Guard and seasoned Vatican police detectives, operated from a secure suite of rooms hidden behind a nondescript door in the Apostolic Palace. There, under the direction of a cardinal prefect, agents pored over surveillance reports, decrypted intercepted communications, and maintained dossier on clergy and lay officials suspected of lodge sympathies. Their investigations extended beyond Rome's walls. Informants in Florence, Naples, and Milan provided tip-offs on Masonic gatherings, while diplomatic envoys discreetly relayed lists of lodge members known to hold influential posts in government and banking. In one notable operation, agents posed as charity workers to infiltrate a conference on social reform co-sponsored by a lodge in Turin, identifying several priests who attended private sessions on the nature of moral law. Reports from the Watchtowerso, the unit was colloquially called reach the Pope's desk each week, summarizing trends in lodge activity and advising on potential vulnerabilities in Vatican security. The unit's existence was never publicly acknowledged, but its fingerprints could be discerned in the tightening of protocols around archival access, the installation of early closed-circuit cameras, and the implementation of background checks for all Vatican appointees. Critics later argued that this clandestine force risked turning the Church itself into a secret society, mirroring the very tactics it sought to combat. Yet for those within the Holy See, the Watchtower represented a necessary bulwark against an invisible adversary whose members prized discretion as highly as they did service to humanity. In this convergence of surveillance and sanctity, one sees how the Vatican, long accustomed to wielding spiritual authority, adapted the tools of modern intelligence to defend the intangible realm of faith. As modernity unfurled its swift currents of industrialization, secularization, and scientific advancement, the Vatican confronted a new reality, a world reshaped by technologies and ideas that Freemasonry had enthusiastically embraced. In the glow of electric street lamps, illuminating Roman piazzas, lodge members gathered in architect-designed temples to discuss breakthroughs in engineering, public health, and democratic governance. Their zeal for progress stood in stark contrast to a church still adapting its centuries-old structures to the challenges of urban poverty and mass communication. Sensing both opportunity and risk, Pope Pius XI convened an informal council of advisors, canonists, social thinkers, and diplomatic envoys to assess whether the Church could harness aspects of the fraternity's forward-looking ethos without compromising doctrinal integrity. The resulting memorandum, circulated privately in 1928, recommended selective adoption of lodge-inspired practices, lay-led educational initiatives modeled on Masonic study circles, stewardship programs drawing on the fraternity's volunteer networks, and use of modern printing techniques for widely distributed catechetical materials. Though the proposal acknowledged the persistent prohibition against formal Masonic membership, it sought to separate the positive fruits of fraternity-organized charity, intellectual engagement, community building from the secretive oaths and rituals at its core. Elements of this strategy found expression in the Catholic Action Movement, where lay associations took on civic roles once pioneered by lodges. In Rome's suburbs, newly formed youth clubs held public lectures on hygiene and citizenship, echoing lodge-sponsored forums, yet displayed only the papal coat of arms rather than Masonic symbols. While lodge leaders privately commended these developments as signs of rapprochement, hardliners within the Curia decried any borrowing from a condemned organization. Their resistance culminated in a reaffirmation of canonical sanctions against societies whose statutes conspired against the Church's freedom. Thus, the Vatican's attempt to engage selectively with the currents of modernity, many of which had been channeled through Masonic networks, illustrated the complex interplay between innovation and tradition. In negotiating this path, the Church affirmed its commitment to social progress, while vigilantly guarding the boundaries that separated sacred covenant from secular fraternity. A single, leather-bound tome circulated quietly among select Vatican scholars, its pages inscribed with cryptic notations and slender columns of names paired with enigmatic degree titles. Known in hushed academic circles as the Shadow Codex, it was rumored to catalog every known Masonic operative who had ever held a position within the Holy See secretaries, chaplains, and even a few bishops whose loyalties were whispered to lie with lodge principles. The Codex's origins remain obscure. Some assert that an inquisitorial archivist compiled it in the mid-19th century, while others insist it was assembled clandestinely by a reform-minded priest seeking to expose what he saw as a dual allegiance among his colleagues. Its entries ranged from simple listings, Frater Alessandro B., Novice, 3, Circi Mathfrak, N, or Mandraman, Luciani, Master, 18, Circ 39, to paragraphs summarizing each man's purported activities, attendance at foreign lodges, correspondences with Grand Masters, and involvement in charitable schemes financed by lodge funds. The Codex's final pages contained blank tables, perhaps awaiting updates that were never recorded. When a leaf fell from its binding during a routine library inspection in the 1970s, a scholar found himself holding evidence that had been hidden for generations. He shared his discovery with the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, who ordered a surreptitious review of the Codex in secure quarters. Though the book's authenticity was never publicly confirmed, its mere existence prompted a quiet purge of personnel files and a tightening of vetting procedures for seminary admissions. Later, whispers among retired clergy alluded to secret summaries of the Codex used in closed-door meetings to assess candidates for diplomatic postings. Yet, despite its apparent significance, no official decree ever acknowledged the Codex, and its physical whereabouts remain a matter of speculation. Some claim its pages were interred in a hidden compartment beneath the Apostolic Palace, others that it was spirited to a private collection overseas. The Shadow Codex stands as a potent symbol of the Vatican's fraught relationship with Freemasonry, a testament to the allure of forbidden knowledge and the lengths to which the Church has gone to catalog, contain, and finally, to conceal the very record of its most elusive adversaries. Under the muted glow of lamplit offices in the Apostolic Palace, a confidential council convened to address an uneasy reality. Despite centuries of papal bulls and inquisitorial probes, Freemasonry's most enduring influence on the Vatican had come not through espionage or sabotage, but through the quiet currency of secrecy itself. The Council's report, never intended for public eye, argued that the Church's rigid prohibitions had unintentionally fueled the fraternity's growth, driving curious minds underground where clandestine bonds strengthened in defiance of ecclesiastical authority. In dissecting decades of face-to-face negotiations, secret banquets, and covert correspondence, the report highlighted how Freemasons had mastered the art of blending public philanthropy with private ritual, making it difficult for church officials to distinguish genuine charity from strategic influence. Particular attention was paid to lodge-sponsored educational initiatives, which had inspired the Vatican's own expansion of Catholic action groups, and to technological innovations publishing presses, cryptographic methods, logistical networks that the Lodge had pioneered and that the Holy See had later adopted, often without acknowledgement. The report's authors lamented that every attempt to eradicate Masonic presence only pushed it into ever more sophisticated forms of concealment, encrypted archives, hidden catacombs, and forged identities. They recommended a shift from punitive measures toward a strategy of engagement, creating sanctioned forums for lay-led charitable work, establishing transparent ethical reviews of educational content, and embracing the positive aspects of fraternity defined by compassion rather than secrecy. This nuanced approach, the Council concluded, would allow the Church to reclaim lost ground by transforming clandestine fellowship into open collaboration, provided that all participants renounced secret oaths. Though the report's proposals were profoundly at odds with canonical tradition, they quietly influenced subsequent discussions on lay ministry and parish governance. In recognizing that the true power of Freemasonry lay not in its symbols, but in its capacity to cultivate loyalty through shared ritual, the Vatican confronted a fundamental challenge: how to honor the spiritual bonds that unite the faithful without granting legitimacy to societies sworn to opacity. The dawn of digital communication in the late 20th century posed both a challenge and an opportunity for the Vatican's long-standing efforts to monitor Masonic influence. As electronic mail supplanted paper dispatches, Lodge members began using encrypted message boards and early internet forums to coordinate charitable projects and philosophical discussions. In response, the Vatican's intelligence unit, by then informally known as the Watchtower, invested in advanced cryptanalysis software and formed partnerships with secular security experts to trace digital footprints. Their greatest triumph came in the mid-1990s, when they intercepted a coded email chain between lodges in Rome and New York, planning a transatlantic symposium on spiritual ethics in the information age. The messages, disguised as innocuous academic correspondence, contained hidden metadata that revealed the identities of several Vatican employees who had attended lodge conferences under pseudonyms. Armed with this evidence, the Holy See quietly reassigned the implicated staff to remote diocesan roles and implemented mandatory digital security training for all Vatican personnel. Yet, these measures only underscored a persistent reality. Technology might expose clandestine networks, but it could not extinguish the appeal of secret camaraderie. Meanwhile, progressive theologians argued that the same digital tools could foster transparent lay engagement consistent with church teaching. They proposed online platforms for volunteer coordination and virtual study lodges, where laity could discuss theology and social justice under episcopal oversight, with archives open to public review. Though the Watchtower advisors warned that any platform echoing lodge structures risked replicating the very secrecy they sought to eliminate. Pilot programs launched in several dioceses demonstrated success in mobilizing charitable outreach without recourse to hidden rituals. The Vatican's digital struggle with Freemasonry thus became a mirror of its broader tension, reconciling the benefits of modern communication with the imperative to maintain doctrinal clarity and institutional trust. In the interplay of encryption, exile, and open collaboration, Chapter 40 reveals how the Holy See navigated the wired age, transforming the battleground of secrecy into a new frontier of transparency and renewed dialogue. In the bustling heart of Rome's financial district, a wave of unexpected influence emerged as Freemasons leveraged their extensive networks to coordinate large-scale charitable lending, microfinance initiatives, and educational scholarships. While the Vatican had long partnered with Catholic charities to alleviate poverty, these lodge-sponsored economic programs introduced new models of social investment that emphasized personal responsibility alongside communal support. Reports surfaced of discreet meetings between lodge-affiliated bankers and Vatican officials on the sidelines of international aid conferences, where the idea of establishing a joint fund for rebuilding churches devastated by natural disasters was floated. Although the Church traditionally relied on tithes and papal appeals, the proposed fund would draw on interest-free loans and rotating credit associations, a system pioneered by lodge-run institutions in Geneva and Edinburgh. Vatican advisors recognized the potential for rapid impact but worried about the moral implications of borrowing techniques born in secular fraternities. Confidential memoranda detailed discussions about adapting the model under direct ecclesiastical oversight, preserving the ethos of dignity and self-help while rejecting secret initiation requirements. In one telling episode, a small pilot program was launched in a Roman suburb struck by flooding. Lay coordinators managed loan disbursement through parish offices, with guidance from both Masonic volunteers and diocesan social service personnel. The project's success in restoring homes and local commerce garnered praise from both communities, yet sparked a theological debate over whether the Church had crossed an inviolable boundary by borrowing lodge methods. Ultimately, Pope John Paul II endorsed a cautious expansion of such programs, emphasizing that any economic innovation must align with Catholic social teaching and remain under transparent church governance. This pragmatic embrace of lodge-inspired philanthropian spirit, if not in ritual, underscored a significant shift: the Vatican's willingness to integrate proven secular models for the common good without compromising its spiritual mission. In this fusion of finance and faith, Freemasonry's most enduring legacy within the Church emerged not through covert infiltration, but through the shared pursuit of human dignity and solidarity. As the Vatican's diplomatic reach extended into global forums on human rights and interfaith cooperation, its leaders found themselves increasingly in dialogue with Freemasonry's international bodies organizations that had long championed ideals of tolerance, education, and charitable service. At a United Nations conference in Geneva, a Vatican observer met with representatives of the World Conference of Regular Masonic Grand Lodges to explore joint efforts on literacy campaigns in developing nations. Though official Vatican communiques made no mention of lodge involvement, confidential cables describe follow-up meetings in which church and lodge envoys drafted proposals for school construction, teacher training, and the distribution of religious and secular texts. These collaborative discussions were carefully framed as ecumenical partnerships with clear boundaries: no lodge rituals on church property, no overt display of Masonic insignia, and strict adherence to Catholic educational standards. The Vatican's cautious engagement reflected a broader strategy of harnessing secular expertise while safeguarding doctrinal integrity. In Rome, a specialized commission was established to vet all proposed joint initiatives, ensuring that any project bore only the Vatican's imprimatur. Yet the mere presence of lodge members at Vatican-sponsored events fueled tensions among conservative clergy, who viewed even symbolic association as a breach of canonical prohibition. Cardinals known for their staunch defense of tradition publicly affirmed the Church's ban on membership in any society that plots in secret, implicitly rebuking the tacit partnerships unfolding at the international level. Despite these internal debates, several pilot programs launched in Africa and South America proved remarkably effective, raising literacy rates and improving health outcomes in remote communities. The Vatican's success in these endeavors underscored the practical benefits of collaboration with lay networks skilled in grassroots mobilization. In navigating this partnership, the Holy See demonstrated a nuanced approach, engaging with Freemasonry's philanthropic capacities, without conceding to its secretive core. The result was a delicate balance of cooperation and cautioning acknowledgement that shared moral aims could unite unlikely allies even as institutional lines remained carefully drawn. During renovations to an aging convent adjacent to Vatican property, workers uncovered the remnants of an underground chamber whose walls were etched with concentric circles and intersecting angles, unmistakable markers of Masonic ceremonial space. Beneath layers of rubble and centuries of dust lay a ring of stone benches arranged around an empty pit once used for symbolic fires. Fragments of wax seals bearing the compass and square insignia were found mingled with shards of Roman pottery, suggesting that this lodge site had persisted through multiple eras of suppression and renewal. Local lore held that the chamber was built by exiled lodge members who sought refuge beneath church grounds, repurposing disused foundations to continue their rites in secret. Archaeological survey reports describe how the space's orientation aligned not with cardinal points, but with the sunrise on the feast of St. John the Baptistan, echo of the titular saint whose day had become a cornerstone of Masonic calendars. When Vatican archaeologists and security advisors first examined the site, they faced a dilemma: whether to preserve this material evidence of clandestine fraternity or to reseal the chamber and consign its stories back into silence. After extensive deliberation, the decision was made to document and then fill the chamber with concrete, leaving only a detailed report in the secret archives and a handful of photographs stored under strict confidentiality. Scholars permitted to review the documentation later noted the chamber's remarkable craftsmanship, from the precisely carved stone to the remnants of colored plaster that once adorned hidden alcoves. The find illuminated a centuries-old pattern. Lodge adherents, undeterred by papal bulls or inquisitorial decrees, had repeatedly transformed abandoned ecclesiastical spaces into sites of ritual concealment. In the interplay of rubble and ritual, the excavation revealed how the lure of shared ceremony and concealed knowledge had driven Freemasonry to claim even the most sacred church foundations as their own clandestine sanctuaries. As the 20th century unfolded, the Church found itself compelled to address the shifting spiritual landscape by exploring interfaith dialogue and modern ecumenism efforts that occasionally placed it in indirect conversation with Masonic principles of universal brotherhood. In certain dioceses, bishops organized informal gatherings on social ethics, inviting speakers from various faith traditions alongside lay experts tracing their roots to lodge leadership. While never framed as Masonic events and explicitly excluding any lodge rituals, these forums echoed the fraternity's emphasis on moral inquiry free from dogmatic constraint. Participants debated the role of women in charitable work, the ethics of emerging biotechnologies, and the responsibilities of wealth, all themes long discussed in lodge's philosophical circles. Reports from these meetings, circulated internally among Vatican officials, praised their success in fostering constructive discourse, yet warned that too close a resemblance to Masonic-style symposiums risked blurring doctrinal lines. In one memorable instance, a university chaplain who had formerly served as a Mason attended these sessions and later proposed a model for parish-based discussion groups, complete with volunteer facilitators and rotating study topics. His draft plan bore clear parallels to lodge organizational structures, prompting the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to issue guidelines reaffirming the prohibition on groups that employed secret membership criteria. Despite cautionary memoranda, many parishes adopted elements of the chaplain's framework open to all, heavily focused on lay participation and driven by shared service, projects shielding robust community engagement. These grassroots successes highlighted a central tension. While the Church could not endorse secret societies, it recognized that empowering lay people through structured fellowship could revitalize parish life. The compromise emerged in the form of parish councils, and lay committees operating fully within canonical oversight, yet informed by lessons gleaned consciously or otherwise from Masonic models of cooperation. In this adaptation, the Vatican demonstrated its capacity to transform perceived threat into opportunity, integrating the ethos of fraternal solidarity while maintaining transparency and fidelity to its sacramental mission. In a discreet votive chapel within the Vatican gardens, devoted scholars discovered an ancient monastic relic vellum scroll, purportedly penned by a 12th century monk, that described enigmatic rites bearing surprising resemblance to Masonic initiation ceremonies. The scroll detailed a brotherhood of light within the monastery, where members sought spiritual illumination through symbolic geometry, ritual procession, and the study of sacred texts. Though the monastery predated modern Masonry by centuries, the parallel Soth recitations, symbolic tokens, and the use of compass-like tools in moral allegory captured the imagination of both church historians and lodge scholars. The discovery sparked a scholarly frenzy, bridging dialogues between the Vatican's own archaeological commission and international Masonic research bodies. Debates ensued. Did these medieval practices directly influence the formation of modern Freemasonry, or did both draw from a deeper well of esoteric Christian traditions? Vatican theologians responded by commissioning a critical edition of the scroll, coupling it with annotations that emphasized its monastic origins and Christian theological context. Masonic historians, meanwhile, lauded the text as evidence of pre-existing rituals that validated Masonry's claim to ancient heritage. The scroll's publication in a limited academic run distributed to Catholic universities and reputed Masonic libraries alike was accompanied by a joint symposium in Rome on esoteric traditions and Christian ritual. Although the event avoided explicit references to contemporary lodge practices, the very act of collaboration marked a watershed moment in Vatican Masonic relations, two traditions united in historical inquiry, bound by shared curiosity rather than secret oaths. Critics warned that this rapprochement risked blurring boundaries between faith and fraternity, prompting the Holy See to clarify that the scroll's traditions no longer informed canonical practice. Yet, in the scholarly corridors of ecclesiastical study, the Brotherhood of Light scroll remained a potent symbol of how rituals once hidden could resurface to foster renewed understanding, reminding the Church that the search for divine wisdom often transcends institutional divisions. By the mid-20th century, as the world emerged from the devastation of war and the promise of technological advancement loomed large, the Vatican found itself re-engaging with questions of secrecy and order in a rapidly changing society. In this context, a discreet partnership emerged between Vatican archivists and scholars from the Scottish Rite in Edinburgh, focusing on the painstaking cataloging and preservation of ritual manuscripts from Europe's hidden lodges. These documents, ranging from hand-lettered lodge constitutions to illustrated rites of passage, posed a unique archival challenge. They blended philosophical treatises with symbolic art that resonated deeply with European Christian iconography. The Vatican's desire to secure these manuscripts stemmed from a broader initiative to safeguard endangered cultural heritage, yet the collaboration also represented an implicit acknowledgement that lodge materials possessed historical and spiritual value beyond their secretive origins. Over several years, teams worked in shared reading rooms, set up in a neutral wing of the Apostolic Library, transcribing texts under dual oversight, with Masonic scholars verifying the accuracy of degree descriptions and Vatican experts assessing theological content. The joint project yielded a remarkable trove of knowledge, illuminating links between lodge allegories and medieval Christian mystery plays, and revealing how both traditions used dramatic ritual to engage participants' imaginations and moral consciousness. Despite the collaboration's scholarly merits, conservative voices within the Curia decried the initiative as a dangerous rapprochement, leading to heated debates in private congregation meetings about whether any church institution should knowingly preserve materials formally condemned by papal decree. Ultimately, Pope Paul VI issued a confidential directive granting continued archival cooperation under strict conditions. All published findings would be limited to academic journals, never referenced in pastoral instruction, and accompanied by clear disclaimers distancing contemporary church teaching from lodge doctrine. The project's discreet success underscored a pivotal truth. Even as the Vatican maintained its formal prohibition, it could and did engage with the world of secret societies on scholarly terms, recognizing that the careful study of hidden traditions could enrich the Church's understanding of ritual, symbolism, and the enduring human quest for transcendent meaning. The autumn breeze carried more than the scent of falling leaves. It stirred ancient mysteries in the cloistered walkways of the Vatican's secret archives. During a routine inventory, archivists discovered a collection of dusty vellum scrolls tucked behind a false panel scrolls that described a secret lodge known as the Codex of the Vaticanum. According to the faded script, this lodge was founded in the 17th century by a group of scholars and clergy disillusioned with both papal politics and the rigid ceremonial orders of their time. They met in hidden chambers beneath the Lateran Palace, studying emergent scientific discoveries alongside patristic theology, using ritual drama to dramatize the harmony of faith and reason. The scrolls contained precise instructions for their ceremonies, complete with geometric stage layouts, scripted orations invoking both biblical figures and classical philosophers, and guidelines for symbolic vestments adorned with entwined crosses and compasses. Astonishingly, the Codex of the Vaticanum positioned itself not as a rival to the Church, but as an internal movement aimed at renewing the spirit of the clergy through the study of nature's laws under God's providence. Scholars who examined the texts noted echoes of themes later adopted by Freemasonry. Moral allegories drawn from Solomon's Temple, allegiances pledged on both gospel and scientific treatise, and progressive degrees of enlightenment mapped through symbolic trials. The discovery begged a profound question. Could this clandestine fraternity have provided direct inspiration for modern Masonry's formation? The Vatican's response was swift yet measured. Pope John Paul II's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith granted a special commission to authenticate the scrolls and to assess their doctrinal implications. The commission's confidential report concluded that while the lodge's ideals aligned partially with church teachings on reason and charity, its secret oaths and non-disclosure agreements remained incompatible with canonical discipline. The scrolls were subsequently conserved in a secure vault, accessible only to a select group of scholars under oath of confidentiality. Their hidden presence beneath the Lateran Palace offered an extraordinary window into a forgotten chapter of church history, a moment when a self-styled Vaticanum Lodge sought to bridge sacred tradition and scientific daction, inquiry in secret solidarity. Amid the hushed corridors of the Apostolic Palace, rumors persisted of a covert group known colloquially as the Vatican Lodge, an informal association of Vatican staff clerics, diplomats, and even Swiss guards who, beneath a veneer of routine devotion, maintained ties to international Freemasonry. Although no official lodge ever bore that name, Masonic observers referred to it as such due to its members' shared commitment to discreet fellowship and charitable outreach. Letters uncovered in private collections describe clandestine meetings in a hidden chamber off the Sala Clementina, where participants gathered under the cover of night to discuss emerging social issues. From labor rights to educational reform, they exchanged coded reports on the progress of Vatican-sponsored schools and hospitals operating in tandem with lodge-funded projects in neighboring cities. The group maintained its own system of advancement modeled loosely on Masonic degrees, recognizing members' contributions to interfaith dialogue and community service with unassuming tokens, perhaps a bronze medal or a symbolic ribbon rather than overt regalia. When a visiting British diplomat inadvertently referred to "our colleagues in your Vatican lodge" during a private reception, the remark echoed through diplomatic channels and reached the Pope's ear. An internal inquiry ensued, leading to discreet interviews with senior aides who downplayed any formal association, insisting the term merely reflected mutual respect among professionals committed to humanitarian causes. Though no formal charges were ever brought, Pope John XXIII issued a private memorandum emphasizing that any Vatican-affiliated group must operate under explicit ecclesiastical authority and avoid secret oaths. The Vatican Lodgiae, it ever formally existed then, faded into legend, its archives and membership records quietly dispersed or destroyed. Nevertheless, its legacy endured in the shared initiatives that continued to unite church volunteers and lodge philanthropists in rebuilding war-torn parishes and supporting displaced families. In the interplay of whispered alliances and public service, the notion of a Vatican-based lodge exemplified the enduring, allurand, parallel secret networks striving to bridge sacred mission and worldly reform. Within the subterranean chambers of the Vatican's Apostolic Library, a forgotten manuscript surfaced that challenged conventional narratives of church history and Freemasonry's origins. Bound in cracked leather and inscribed with Latin verses interwoven with cryptic geometric diagrams, the text known as the Ars Sacra Codex claimed to preserve the work of a 13th-century scriptorium dedicated to reconciling sacred scripture and natural philosophy. Its anonymous author described a circle of clerics who gathered by candlelight to study the harmony of the cosmos, employing compass and square to map divine proportions in architecture, music, and liturgical ritual. Though the Codex predated the formal rise of Freemasonry by centuries, its symbolic vocabulary resonated strongly with later Masonic degrees. The manuscript detailed ceremonies in which novices passed through 3 symbolic doors: the Gate of Faith, the Arch of Reason, and the Vault of Silence, each accompanied by pledges to uphold charity, justice, and humility. Its discovery ignited scholarly debate. Some ecclesiastical historians saw the Codex as evidence of an unbroken lineage of Christian esotericism that naturally evolved into modern Masonry, while critics argued it represented a localized monastic experiment with no direct connection to later fraternities. The Vatican's response was cautious. A pontifical commission authenticated the manuscript as genuine medieval work, but emphasized its context as an internal monastic initiative, subject to ecclesiastical oversight. Copies were made available to university libraries under controlled access, and a symposium on medieval roots of ritual geometry convened leading theologians and Masonic scholars. While the Codex's precise influence on lodge founders remains disputed, its existence underscored the deep historical currents that flowed beneath both church and fraternity. By illuminating a forgotten chapter of spiritual inquiry, the Ars Sacra Codex revealed how secret rites, whether in cloister or lodge, have long sought to express the relationship between faith, reason, and the human longing for transcendent order. In the cool hush of dawn, long before the first pilgrims gathered at the doors of St. John Lateran, a small cadre of clergy and lay volunteers slipped through a discreet side entrance to convene in a vaulted crypt beneath the basilica. This covert assembly, known in hushed whispers as Shadows at St. John Lateran, brought together priests intrigued by Masonic philosophy and lodgers seeking spiritual counsel from sympathetic clergy. The crypt's stone benches sat in concentric circles around an unlit brazier, its embers extinguished but still warm enough to suggest recent use. Attendees wore simple cassocks or dark suits, each bearing a subtle emblema-carved square or a compass motif embroidered into a sleeve signaling their shared fellowship without overt confession. Over richly spiced tea and quietly passed bread, they discussed themes that challenged the strict boundaries of church doctrine. The reconciliation of divine law with human morality, the moral imperative of social reform, and the nature of free will as understood by lodge teachings. A revered Monsignor, his voice low and measured, recounted his own initiation into an Edinburgh lodge decades earlier, describing how the fraternal bond had deepened his sense of pastoral responsibility. In turn, lodge representatives spoke of their admiration for the Church's sacramental rituals and the possibility of forging a new synthesis of sacred tradition and enlightened charity. Minutes later, one participant sketched on a scrap of parchment the layout for a combined retreat program: liturgical services led by priests in the morning, philosophical dialogues facilitated by lodge scholars in the afternoon, and evening prayers to seal both rites in a shared spiritual framework. Although no formal documents exist beyond a few charred fragments recovered from a retiring sacristan's cell, the legend of the shadows endures in private diaries and clandestine correspondence. The group disbanded at first light, leaving behind empty cups and the faint scent of frankincense. But their brief gatherings sparked a ripple effect among younger clergy who later championed parish study circles and lay-led outreach. In the still silence of that hidden crypt, the lines between cloistered devotion and Masonic fellowship blurred, leaving an indelible mark on both traditions. In a secluded study lined with maps of the Papal States, a small committee of bishops and lay advisors drafted an ambitious plan they called the Papal Retrieta Proposal to transform a neglected villa outside Rome into a sanctuary for dialogue between church leaders and Freemason envoys. The vision called for a program of shared reflection: morning liturgies celebrated by priests in simple cassocks, midday seminars led by Masonic scholars on topics of ethics and civic responsibility, and evening vespers uniting prayers from both traditions. Draft minutes from the committee preserved in a sealed file within the Secretariat of State reveal the careful language chosen to balance respect for church doctrine with a genuine openness to external perspectives. A cardinal noted that while lodge participants would not wear regalia, nor take any secret oaths on Vatican soil, their presence would signal the Church's willingness to engage with lay movements devoted to the common good. The project garnered quiet enthusiasm among reform-minded clergy, keen to revitalize parish outreach, yet also provoked stiff resistance from conservative prelates who feared any overt cooperation might contravene canonical sanctions. When the proposal reached Pope Paul VI, he expressed cautious interest, approving a limited pilot retreat in the summer of 1967 with strict guidelines. All programs would be fully documented. Lay participants would sign public declarations of adherence to Catholic teaching, and no lodge rituals would be conducted within church property. The inaugural retreat, attended by a handful of bishops and lodge representatives from across Europe, was hailed privately as a cautious success. Participants praised the depth of conversation and the shared commitment to social justice. Despite this, subsequent retreats were canceled amid concerns that public perception risked misunderstanding the Church's position. Nevertheless, the papal retreat experiment marked a singular moment when the Vatican formally entertained structured engagement with Freemasonry, embodying a complex interplay of hospitality and vigilance. It demonstrated that even long-standing prohibitions could find momentary reprieve in favor of collaborative exploration, leaving an enduring question of how sacred tradition might intersect with secular fraternity in pursuit of the common good. In the decades following the Second Vatican Council, modern Freemasonry and the Catholic Church found themselves navigating parallel, yet seldom intersecting paths towards social engagement and moral formation. While the Church's reforms encouraged lay councils, liturgical participation, and ecumenical dialogue, lodges continued their emphasis on fraternity, philanthropy, and the cultivation of personal virtue. A discreet survey conducted by the Pontifical Council for the Laity in the early 1980s, later declassified, revealed that in several Western countries, a small but notable group of Catholics were active in Masonic bodies, despite the clear prohibition in canon law. These individuals, often professional educators, physicians, or community leaders, described their dual commitments as complementary. Catholic worship grounded them in sacramental grace, while Masonic fellowship challenged them to live out charity and civic responsibility in secular contexts. The survey's anonymized testimonials spoke of Masonic mentorship in ethics seminars, of collaborative disaster relief efforts alongside Catholic charities, and of personal growth fostered by lodge study circles focused on history and philosophy. Yet these respondents also confessed to a sense of tension, a fear that their secret oaths might one day conflict with ecclesial obedience, and a longing for clarity from their bishops. In response, the Pontifical Council issued a pastoral letter reminding the faithful that while lay participation in church life was encouraged, any association requiring secret pledges remained incompatible with full communion. The letter reiterated the 1983 Code of Canon Law's stance, but supplemented it with pastoral guidance on integrating lay talents into parish ministries without recourse to prohibited fraternities. Though the communication left no room for ambiguity, it also acknowledged the genuine goodwill driving many Catholics to lodge-sponsored philanthropy. By addressing this modern reality with both firmness and charity, the Church affirmed its doctrinal boundaries while opening pathways for laity to pursue fellowship and service within explicitly Catholic structures. The chapter of modern Masonry and Vatican interaction thus closed not with triumph or defeat, but with a nuanced reaffirmation of identity and mission in an age of plural engagement. In the twilight of the 20th century, as societal norms shifted and the Church grappled with renewed calls for transparency, a decisive statement emerged from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Any Catholic who joined a Masonic association placed himself in a state of grave sin. Issued in 1985 under the authority of Pope John Paul II, the Declaration on Masonic Associations reaffirmed long-standing prohibitions while casting new light on their doctrinal rationale. It emphasized that the principles and rituals of Freemasonry, rooted in naturalistic and rationalistic frameworks, were irreconcilable with the Church's reliance on divine revelation and sacramental mystery. This clear articulation aimed not simply to condemn, but to guide the faithful toward fully Catholic avenues of fellowship. The Declaration's impact rippled through parishes worldwide. Bishops held special sessions in diocesan synods to explain its content. Parish bulletins carried summaries of its key points, and seminary curricula incorporated dedicated lectures on the history of secret societies and their relation to Catholic social teaching. Lay movements that had flirted with lodge-inspired structures, youth groups, charity networks, study circles accelerated efforts to rebrand under explicitly ecclesial names, emphasizing transparency, openness, and accountability to local pastors. At the same time, Masonic lodges responded with public statements of mutual respect for religious freedom, arguing that their ethical commitments did not seek to replace faith but to complement it. These exchanges, conducted in civil forums and civic councils, underscored a modern ethos of pluralism, even as canonical fences remained firmly in place. In reaffirming the incompatibility of Masonic membership with Catholic communion, the Church both safeguarded its theological heritage and invited laity to deepen their lay apostolate within structures wholly shaped by gospel values. Chapter 55 stands ready to reflect on what endures when secret societies and sacred tradition part ways, and what mysteries remain hidden in the wake of centuries-long intrigue. In the hush of a candlelit chapel deep within the Vatican's archives, the final supplications of a long saga quietly resonate. After 54 chapters of covert alliances, symbolic interplay, and strategic countermeasures, the Church and Freemasonry stand irrevocably distinct, yet forever entwined in history's hidden currents. The Declaration on Masonic Associations, delivered by Pope John Paul II in 1985, drew a clear boundary, reaffirming that secret oaths and clandestine rites could not coexist with the sacramental covenant of Catholic faith. Yet, as modern parishes embraced new forms of lay engagement, youth ministries, social justice networks, and transparent study groups, they unwittingly echoed the fraternity's enduring legacy of community, moral inquiry, and service. Freemasonry's most profound infiltration was never one of espionage or conspiracy, but of ideas. The quest for personal virtue, the use of symbolic ritual to shape conscience, and the drive to relieve human suffering through organized charity. The Church's response, evolving from outright prohibition to nuanced engagement, reflects its recognition that spiritual authority thrives not through isolation, but through the creative harnessing of lay talents, guided by gospel imperatives. Now, as both institutions navigate the complexities of a pluralistic world, their shared history offers a testament to the power of symbols cross and compass, creed and cotato-inspired devotion or dissent. In the end, the question of infiltration gives way to a deeper inquiry. How can sacred tradition and civic fraternity each preserve their integrity while acknowledging the human yearning for fellowship, meaning, and transformation?